So I'm Jordan Burnham. I work at Petroleum Canada. I'm a reservoir engineer. We've got a pretty large land base in the Montney in northeast British Columbia up in Canada. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is just a relatively simple method for determining reservoir pressure from RTA, and in particular, determining depletion. So I'm sure most of you have seen something like this before on your specialized plot, where you have a very clear trend, and then you have a discontinuity, and then another very clear trend. We're going to kind of dive into why we see this sort of thing. The first thing we're going to do is look at the production data. This well was a fairly prolific well, and it was choked back early time. So you can see gas rate on the top left there, then condensate, and on the right there's casing pressure, tubing pressure, and calculated sand face pressure. So yeah, you can see it was choked, and then we upsized the choke, see a fairly large increase in gas rate, as well as a change in the drawdown profile. And so when we're looking at why we see that discontinuity, we can come back to our rate normalized pressure equation, which is obviously a very simple equation. We've really just got the initial pressure, the flowing pressure, and the rate. And so of these parameters, we're very confident about the rate here. There's some minor discrepancies on that due to allocation or those sorts of things, but we're pretty confident on that. Flowing pressures, we're quite confident on as long as the well's flowing. So that doesn't seem like it would be the problem, but the reservoir pressure, that's something where there is some uncertainty. And this well, similar to one of the earlier presentations, we had a lot of defits in the area, and so virgin reservoir pressure is not really an unknown, but this was a first order child well. And so coming back to our plot here, what we find is that all of the pre-discontinuity data is all of the pre-choke change data, and vice versa with the other data. And so when you're coming to this, like, some people would be tempted to try to kind of fit a line through the beginning part, or fit a line through the post-choke change data, or try to kind of split the difference in some way. But really, this is kind of a trick question, and there's no real interpretation to this that can be used to populate a model that will give you a good match over the entire production history. And in addition, we'll see that the FCD is quite low, and it results in some erratic behavior later on. So to kind of give you an idea of what this looks like played out is, if you were to go with that first interpretation, matching just the initial data, what you'll see is that you fit the first bit of pressure data very nicely, but after that choke change, you can see that the match is really quite poor, and the production data is very erratic. And the erratic nature is due to the low FCD. And then just wanted to note, like, this change in trend after the choke change is likely an indication of an incorrect reservoir pressure assumption, and that depletion is a possibility here. So this is what happens if we kind of tweak the reservoir pressure. We can find a reservoir pressure that makes all of the data line up in a nice straight line as we would anticipate. And when we do this, notice that the FCD becomes much more similar to this well was part of a 10 well pad, and the FCD was very uncharacteristic on this well. So after making this change, we see that it lines up much better with the rest of the wells on the pad. And in addition, we have a very strong history match here. And this is just literally populating the model with the results of the specialized plot. There's no additional tweaking that's been done here. And so from there, the way that we can really quantify the effect of the depletion is, if we were to forecast this model that's been populated, we can get an EUR for kind of like a depleted case. And then what we can do is take that same model and make the assumption that's not entirely accurate, but at least it gets us somewhere to the point where we can actually do this sort of analysis, is to basically just increase the reservoir pressure in that model to what we think the virgin pressure would be, and run a forecast on that. So then we have two different EURs. We've got a virgin EUR and a depleted EUR, and then we can just take a percentage difference between them to get kind of like a percentage degradation that we can attribute to depletion that's at least some way tied to physics. Then what we can do from there is, if this has been done on a number of wells, then we can start to draw other conclusions from, like determining sort of a depletion index kind of metrics that we can use to predict future degradation from parent-child interactions. And I want to note a very similar approach can be made, which was illustrated today with the auto forecast or the auto LFP fitting stuff that was presented, where a very similar approach to this can be taken, where when you see wells with uncharacteristically high FCD, that can also be a very clear indication that you have some depletion. Along with that, typically you see buildup profiles that don't match history. But one caution with this is that there's a lot less certainty around this approach when you're using just FCD as your driving factor to tell you that you should be doing this analysis, because our flowing pressure calculations are not that accurate when the well's not flowing. So if you're basing your assumption that there's depletion on a buildup profile that's not matching history, that also could be an inaccuracy in the flowing pressure calculation. So just a caution there. And so, yeah, assumptions and limitations for this. We're assuming that any deviation from the initial pressure is purely a result of depletion, which, it's probably fairly close to the right assumption, but not a perfect assumption. And then the other major assumption, that this one's a little bit more difficult to defend, but we're assuming that the SRV would be the same if it were completed in a scenario where there was no depletion. And then the last note there is just mentioning that because in these analytical models that we're running, we have a single reservoir pressure assumption, the EURs derived from this methodology can be a little bit optimistic, just because we have portions of the wellbore that are likely more depleted than others, and averaging that out into a single reservoir pressure means that as we increase the drawdown, we'll have more contribution from more parts of the wellbore, and so it'll kind of give you a false increased LFP for a period of time. Yeah, so that's the overall workflow. Are there any questions or comments?
It's a very nice workflow, actually. A lot of people want to do this quantification of degradation, and it's very relevant actually to Wayne's presentation. And here we can use a reservoir model to do the same.
One of the things I wanted to mention is like maybe sort of enhancement would be having like a little slider that you could drag for reservoir pressure if you're looking at the specialized plot, and then see how the data set changes as you're playing around with that. But
big applause for Jordan.
Thank you very much.
We're going to jump to the last technical presentation before Curtis is going to take the stage here. For those who don't know who Curtis is, that's Curtis Whitson. That's why we call Whitson. It's like if you were into calculus and you went to a calculus conference and Newton was there, it's kind of the same thing. So he sits over there. But we are going to hear from Logan at ConocoPhillips before that.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you for staying till the end. My name is Logan Warren. I'm with ConocoPhillips, and I've met quite a few of you here in the room, and I'm usually talking to you about PVT things or EOR, and happy to talk about those things, keep going forward. But I want to go back 10 years to a project that I had the privilege to work on, which was our SRV pilot that we did in the Eagle Ford. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today. Some of this was already published in ERTEC, I think in 2017, then 2019, we did a follow-up paper about a ERTEC paper 263. And so some of this analysis was in that paper, but I'm going to walk through a little bit more today that we didn't include in there and show you a little bit how we did some of this analysis. The objective of our study really was we wanted to try to use DTS data to tell us what the near well fractures look like. And so if you're not familiar with our SRV pilot that we did in 2015, out in Eagleford, we drilled these new wells, and before we completed the well, we drilled a sidetrack well and took a lot of core, and we drilled multiple sidetracks, took core, then we completed the well, and we took more core, and we were able to see how many fractures we actually created. And so back in those days, remember, we were all doing simulations with single fracture per cluster and a large SRV box around all those fractures. And then, of course, the trend was going towards limited SRV boxes around the fractures. But it was always based on the premise of we have a single fracture per cluster. And so that's what this pilot, one of the things we wanted to do was go drill and find out how many fractures we could actually find. Turns out we found a ton of fractures, and there were a lot of fractures in between the clusters. And so we needed to figure out, well, how do these fractures make it all the way back to the wellbore? Because where we actually sampled the well was about 75 feet out, I think, something like that. But we did not know how all these fractures we found actually made it back to the clusters. So we kind of had two theories here. Are we dealing with a point source theory on the right-hand side? Or are these actually planar fractures all the way back to within, 5 feet of the well, something like that? So the only way we could really figure this out is we had DTS data. We had fiber data on this well. And we had the warm back data. You're going to hear me talk about cool downs and warm back. We had that for this well. So we said, well, can we use that to figure out which one of these is more likely? And the take-home message, if you've got to go and pick someone up, hydraulic fracturing fluid is moving between these clusters. That was one of our big kind of takeaways from this. And the data we had didn't support a single fracture per cluster interpretation. So back then we were still doing a lot of our work with that mindset. And this whole project really changed that for us. So what is DTS? If you haven't heard that before, and how do we look at this data? So distributed temperature sensing, there are many people in our company who are much more aware and knowledgeable about DTS and DAS. We have a good team who really does this on a lot of our wells. But essentially, you're measuring temperature along wellbore. And you can see this picture here. This has got a nice picture from my colleague, Kyle Freehoff. It's got a blast protector around some of the fiber. That's going to be important later. But this well that we had, we were recording temperature data along the whole well, and you'll see here an example of a temperature, kind of waterfall plot. And so you see on the left-hand side all these lines. That's when you're actually pumping water down the pipe. And then you see on the far right where you've got these little color changes going out in time. That's the actual stage you fractured, and you see that temperature change where you injected this water, which is going to be colder than what the reservoir is. So I have a little illustration here to show kind of how we did this modeling. So I'm focusing on the left-hand side here on a section of the wellbore, let's call it by the heel. And as you're hydraulically fracturing further down by the toe, you're still picking up temperature responses down here by the heel. And so you can just, I like to think of it as like just put your hand on a pipe that you feel water traveling down that pipe. Your hand's going to feel the temperature as the water's going past. So that's what you were looking at down here towards the heel as they're fracturing further down the well. Then as this keeps marching back towards you, you now have the section that you were monitoring, you've actually fractured that section. And there's an impact from all these kind of the water going down, there's an impact of these cool downs is what I call them, on the section that you actually are going to monitor here. So what we can do is we can actually look at this before and after in this section and see kind of if we can infer what those fractures look like. So what does the raw data tell us? One of the first things we learned in this is that there are cool zones, I'm calling them cool zones, that pre-exist before we actually hydraulically fracture. And the reason why this is important is because a lot of times you'll get this temperature data package back from one of the providers, and they will point to these nice blue sections here and say, this is where you've gotten all this fluid that's gone through these clusters, and you can see it right here on the temperature plot. Well, and that's usually what you see on the right. When we looked at the data, we said, well, this is already here. And so there's some impact of that water flowing by that's cooling down that zone. And that cool down zone is impacting the interpretation on the right, which is after you actually hydraulically fracture the well. This plot shows it a little better. These blue lines here, these are before we actually do any fracturing. And so you can see how there's these kind of up and down valleys and peaks here when you're actually flowing down the pipe. So it doesn't just all drop perfectly evenly along the well. The temperature in this reservoir, we're in Eagleford, it's 320 degrees Fahrenheit. It's hot. We're pumping down surface water. It's sitting at 80 degrees, something like that. It's probably about 100 or so in the pipe. So we're going from 300 in the reservoir down to 150, 180, somewhere in there. But it's not just all perfectly even temperatures as they drop. And then you see the red line there. During hydraulically fracturing, we have an even different temperature profile. But my point here is that those blue lines, there's no fractures in this pipe yet. This is just simply how it cools down. And I like this plot here on the left. This shows you on the left what it looks like when it warms back up. So think about it again as you're way down by the heel and you're fracturing down at the toe. And then when you stop fracturing there, that temperature profile warms back up and it looks nice and flat. On the right, this is what it looks like after you hydraulically fracture. You have a different signature here. So for history matching and simulation modeling, we have to capture these effects of that cool down to be able to try to interpret what those fractures look like. So what does the temperature response look like for a single planar fracture? So we started simple. Here, if you look at the top left, this is the initial reservoir temperature. So some of you may recognize I was using CMG stars, which is a thermal model, and I had built fractures in this model to be able to do this. Stage 5, for example, we shut the well in. You can see this cooling effect, and then it even propagates further out to the right after stage 13. And then by the time I'm going to show you what stage 14, which is by the hill, looked like, if you put a single fracture in there at the bottom left, and then allow that to warm back over 18 days, this is what kind of your temperature is going to look like. It's about 50 degrees cooler or so right there in the middle. This is another way to look at the data. If you think here on this plot on the right, this is the whole stage, which was about 250 feet that we're modeling. And so think of that as looking along the well this way. A single fracture per cluster in the model on the left shows you have still these nice identifiable peaks or valleys there of cool zones. But our data didn't show that. That's not what we saw in our actual DTS data. So given that these cool zones pre-exist, how do we isolate the hydraulic fracturing impact on temperature? What you're looking at here is DTS gives you this kind of 3-foot resolution. I think back in the day it was about 3-foot resolution. They've probably gotten better now. But I'm showing you every 10 feet along that 250-foot stage, showing you temperature slices along that whole stage. And notice this again, I'm looking at stage 14, which was close to our heel. You see that during the hydraulic fracturing all the way down at the toe and all the extra stages, you see these up and downs on the left where it's just cycling up and down with hot and cold. And then on the right-hand side, you see after we hydraulically fractured the well, this is what our temperature warm back was. So we actually had good data in this well too. We had a long shut-in to actually see this temperature go back up. So this is what we're going to history match. We're going to actually history match first what I'm calling a conduction only, and that's that stage where you don't have any fractures, when it's pure conduction into a pipe. You have to history match that first, then we're going to history match the warm back, and we'll create a difference map between these two and see what it looks like. So I've just got a couple slides showing you some of the quality, for example, of this match. This is when you're actually pumping further down the well, and I'm looking at the heel to try to capture those effects where I said these cool zones pre-exist. So we were able to capture that by changing the thermal conductivity along the pipe. We also were able to build in cement thickness and things like that into the model and put some blast. We believe that some of this is due to those blast protectors and other things like that. This is after you actually hydraulic fracture the well, about 4, 6, 8 hours after injection. We're able to get a good match on that data. And here's looking at a single slice. Of course, what we ultimately did was we matched every slice along the 250 feet. But this is just a single one to show you the quality of the match we had on the conduction side, which is the raw data is in the gray. And then we had a separate history match of the warm back data. That I don't have enough time to go into that today, how we did that model, but it took us a long time to be able to do that. We were able to get the ability to match both conduction and warm back. So we can take those two models. One on the left here, for example, is the conduction only, where I just let it warm back completely for 18 days with no fractures. This one, I have fractures in the model, and I'm letting it warm up for 18 days. And these two are the exact same model, so I can basically cell to cell do a different SMAPs and create a temperature and to see how much it actually cooled down over time. What does that temperature in the near well region look like, and how does that relate to time distance away from the well? Here's what we see. These are two different stages, and I need to give you a little background on stage 4 here on the left. Stage 4, it turns out, when we went back and looked at the data, we had the plugs didn't isolate very well. So we actually lost quite a bit of fluid into stage 3. It actually was just going past the plug. We did not get a very good fracture necessarily on stage 4, but at stage 14, which was by the heel, it was one of our best zones in terms of completions. So what you're seeing here is the temperature cool down from what it should be at a conduction only, basically if you had no fractures in the well. And on the left-hand side, you can see that we don't really have any identifiable fractures. And you're seeing these blue dots, that's where our clusters are. You don't necessarily see the identifiable fractures, but we did see the temperature was always colder in between our clusters. And it was much more apparent, of course, in a very well-fractured well, where we were sitting 30 to 50 degrees colder within within these clusters. These clusters back then were about 45 to 50 foot cluster spacing. So however you wanted to run this, whenever you ran single fracture per cluster, you could never get this type of cool down. So we had to put a lot of fractures in there. Well, we'd already drilled the well and we knew there were a lot of fractures in there, but this was the only way we were able to get the temperature to work as well. So our takeaway from this was that this helped us when we started doing the reservoir history match model for that pilot. You may remember we had pressure gauges also installed in that pilot. So we were doing a big history match on rates, bottom hole pressure, and far field pressure gauges that we installed in those side tracks. The only way we were able to get to that was a model that had these primary fractures that were long, and of course they weren't exactly as wide as they were tall, but you had these big primary fractures that do line up with the clusters here, and we saw that in the temperature data. We had closer to the well secondary fractures. This is where we drilled through and found all those fractures. So we called these our secondary fracture network. Some of these come in swarms, they're very close to each other. And within about 10 feet of the reservoir, we had to put another area that we actually felt like we were getting some type of fracturing near the well. We're not exactly sure of the reasons for this, even still now. How did we get water necessarily in between these cluster zones at 50 feet away from each other? Was it a breakdown in cement? Was there bedding kind of planar fractures? We were talking about, is there hoop stress that created a longitudinal fracture along the well? There's a lot of theories going out there. We couldn't fully land on one because we didn't have the data. All we knew is that the temperature was showing that it was colder. We ran some models where we just put water behind the pipe and said, okay, it's just water right there down the pipe, and let that heat back up, but there's no fractures there. And it never matched the data. The only way to get the data to match up on DTS was we had to have a lot of fractures within 10 feet connecting back up to the wellbore. And when we added that to our reservoir model as well, my colleague Yongshi Liu was doing this, we were able to get a really good batch, not only on far field pressure data, BHP rates, everything. It all lined into place. So that's where the model, you'll see a model in that paper that's got this kind of near well region. That's how we determined that. And it was from our DTS data. And we spent a lot of time just to try to make sure we could isolate, what was pre-existing, what wasn't there, and which part of this DTS actually shows us fractures. Okay, thanks.
Looked expensive. Any questions? If there's any more questions, we're going to give Logan another round of applause.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
And then we're going to get the real boss up here. Some call him the Godfather, Mr. or Dr. Curtis Whitson. Yeah, no worries. Well, I'll try a couple of jokes in the meanwhile to get the time running. We need to mic him up. Well, try one of my go-tos. I'm not very big on social media, but you can follow me on Venmo. You see, James? It's a good joke. He's from New Brunswick. So I don't know. Do you know where that is? In Canada. Anyways, nobody's heard about it, James. And now Curtis comes. Here. And you know what he calls New Brunswick? The Sweden of Canada.
Somebody else do that. So, long day. It's a lot of very familiar faces out there. I want to say howdy if I didn't see you earlier, and all the new people I've met. My name's Curtis Whitson, and kind of where the Whitson comes from. But before I start talking about the Fetkovich Technology Award, which I promised Mike Fetkovich's two sons, Eddie and Mick. Mick, you're here. That we'd remember his dad for many years to come. So this is the fourth year in a row we've had this technology award. Before I get started on this, I wanted to just say that I've heard the name Whitson a lot of times today, a lot more times than I usually hear it. And every time I heard it, I knew it wasn't talking about me. But I just wanted to recognize and I think give a hand, including I'll be giving them a hand myself. These folks over here, this is the Whitson you've been talking about. And some of them don't have ties on, so they may be hiding around. I just wanted to give them a great thank you for giving the industry and giving y'all folks a lot of great software, a lot of great technology, a lot of support and everything. So anyway, I just want to say thank you to everybody here. So now I got to figure out how to get to the next slide. That's how old I am here. So I can't read the computer here, so I got to watch. This here on the left is Mike Fetkovich, and he was a very, very dear and close friend. He was a mentor, and so basically we are presenting this prize to recognize people in the industry who have contributed to what I would say Mike has left as a legacy, at least to me. He always said that the petroleum engineer's job was basically to provide his company with accurate forecast of what wells are going to produce. And that basically we've been called improving the accuracy and certainty of petroleum resource determination and production forecasting. He would have never put it that way, but basically forecasting rates. And that's what he did very well. And I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about these pictures here are not me when I was old. These are all pictures of Mike from young age to later in life. He basically was my technical dad. I met him in 1979. He was visiting Stavanger's year after I came to Norway. I came in 1978, and he and Raj Raghavan came to hold a 5-day course, and I was lucky enough to get invited. That's where I met Mike. He taught 2 days of the course on decline curve analysis based on his 1973 paper, and then Raj taught a pressure transient analysis course the other 3 days. And to me, it was like being in heaven talking with St. Peter. So it was an incredible experience, and I had a whole until he passed away 5 years ago. We had a great relationship. The family I know very well, and but basically he was like a technical father. I actually had two. Another was Keith Coates, and his granddaughter's here with us, and the two of them combined makes you a dangerous person if you use them as. So anyway, Mike was what I would call the ultimate petroleum engineer. And what I really mean by that is I think he presented technologies through papers and publications, but really the work, collective work of all of what he did at Phillips Petroleum Company as a petroleum engineer was probably as important. And also his communication of that understanding of petroleum engineering through publications and courses that he taught, and the mentoring he did of people who worked with him. I think we got a few people who was in the Fetkovich, I wouldn't call them mafia, maybe disciples in Bartlesville. And basically he was the ultimate petroleum engineer. He did a job for his company, and I would call him a brilliant and innovative, both brilliant and innovative. But he was only interested in solving problems, real problems, bottom line problems, theoretical problems that he never saw data, and everything was seen through the eyes of data. So whatever he saw in data, he wanted to understand why the data performed the way they did, and handled his life and his career in that way. He was very demanding. Mick, I think you can probably best testify to that. He always did his very best, I think, day in and day out, whether it was fishing or eating dinner or whatever. He was always doing his best, and he always expected those of us around him to do our best. And it was a kind of a philosophy that rubbed off, I think, on everybody. And then I've given you the 5 F's of Mike Vetkovich. Now, he never made an F, I think, in school ever, but he lived by these 5 F's. And I think there's one missing here. We'll get to that. But basically, family, friends, faith, food, and football. And he was tenacious. He was talking about it. And when I started thinking about his tenacity of how important these things were to him on a daily basis, I remember I left out one of the important F's in his life, and that was fishing. And he took that also, I think, quite seriously. So anyway, these are the things that he kind of like I saw and he meant to me. What he meant to us as a collective industry was basically the flow equation, Darcy, and material balance. Everything basically fell out of that. Pretty much everything that he did, all the publications revert back to these 2 things. Now he did use the diffusivity equation. He never wrote it. He never talked about it. But if you ever worked with Mike, his understanding of the diffusivity equation through dimensionless pressure, where he learned it in a course from I think it was Hank Ramey in the 1960s, to the dimensionless rate function, which is what he used most of his career, to combine, for example, ARP's boundary-dominated decline curve with infinite acting decline. Basically, he lived and breathed the diffusivity equation without ever writing it. So I feel good because I wouldn't know how to write it anyway as well. So not a requirement. But he also introduced, when Darcy wasn't good enough, which for gas wells is pretty much most of the time, you have a nonlinearity that has to be taken into account that Forsheimer gave us. But he also showed it in the first well produced in the exploration well that was producing from the Equifax field on Christmas Eve, 1969, that the well had the Forsheimer term, the quadratic term, was required to model that behavior in oil wells. And then he also included a little bit of vertical performance and in my opinion, produced the first kind of paper that talked about nodal analysis, where you couple the reservoir to the tubing and to the surface. And he had presented a paper on that as well. So these are some of the things that he presented to us. But if you knew Mike, you knew how, because he got out of the steel mills of Pittsburgh, around Pittsburgh, by going to college. And education meant a lot to him. I think all his kids got educated and grandkids. And so education was very important. Training was very important. He taught a lot of courses himself. He had a lot of his people teaching courses, and education was an important part of that. And then mentoring was something he did his entire life, with many resulting in that. So basically, he was sharing his knowledge with us as an industry, with the people he worked with, and with the community at large. Mick reminded me of what he used to say: "I can teach you, I can't learn for you." And a lot of the things that he tried to teach people, it was not easy to learn, but that was on your shoulders. But he tried his best to help teach concepts that were sometimes difficult to understand. And the recipient of this year's Vetkovich Technology Award is someone who has basically shared this knowledge of both rate transient analysis and many other areas of petroleum engineering. And we just want to thank Dave Anderson, who was basically instrumental in the building of, are they our competitor anymore? That other program? No, but they took and they did before us, long before us, a great deal of training. They brought rate transient analysis and all that's around that to the industry. And we just want to, where's the plaque? We want to bring them up here. Congratulations. Matthias is kind of a funny guy. He can say funny things. I'm just an old boring guy. I hope you got a little more lighthearted stuff to tell us.
Oh, way to put me on the spot.
As a good teacher. But I hope you appreciate the recognition, because he was a great man and you've done great things. And if you got a few words to say, then
I do, yeah.
Okay.
To say that I appreciate the recognition would be an understatement. Truly, honored to receive this award. I want to thank Curtis and Matthias and whoever out there that bribed them to choose me for this award in 2025. Very much appreciated. I'll say a few words. I never got the chance to, unfortunately, to personally meet Mike Fetkevich, but his body of work and his legacy had a transformative impact on my career. And I got two examples I can sort of share with you on this. The first one was when I first started my career in the late 90s. I was just working as a lowly petroleum evaluation engineer. I was doing evaluation for junior oil and gas companies in Calgary in Canada. And like, to be honest with you, at first I found that work kind of boring and a little bit confusing. There was like a lot of rules of thumb. You know, this is, you do this and you do this. And I had some really good mentors, but they couldn't really explain. There was no, my mind craved something that was sort of a unifying theory behind this that made it all make sense. And at first I just didn't have access to that. And it wasn't until I took probably the same industry short course you're talking about, but when I took it, it was taught by Dave Reese, who was one of Mike Fetkevich's proteges. And he was really good. He was an awesome instructor. And that was my first exposure to the Fetkevich type curves, which were, I still have the binder of this course. It's about that thick. And the type curves were on, you know, vellum paper, you know, transparency paper. And I'm like, what the heck are these? I'd sort of seen something like that before. And honestly, it was like somebody turned on a light in a dark room. Like everything made sense, right? You look at these type curves, you're trying to understand production data. It was brilliant because of its simplicity. And you made the comment, you know, he didn't have to write out the diffusivity equation, but he knew it, he understood it, and he understood the components of it that were needed to make what people were doing practical and make sure that that data could be used to solve real problems. So that was ever since that moment, which was really early in my career, I always thought about production data and reservoir engineering differently after that. And then the second time was actually quite a few years later. I worked at Fiquet for 18 years, and I started doing reserves evaluations. Then I got into doing pressure transient analysis. I did well test analysis, which was totally a different thing. And then I got lucky enough in the early 2000s to get pulled into an R&D software group with Louis Matar, who was my mentor. And there was just 4 of us in that group. There was me and another engineer and our chief software architect, who I think worked for Whitson for a few weeks, and one other developer. And our task, you know, Louis brought this stack of papers into the boardroom. It was about a foot high. And he said, I want you guys to go through these. Louis was a pretty blunt guy, but very kind. And he had high expectations and really smart guy. And you know, he was willing to put in the work too. He's like, you guys go through these. What I want is a prototype software program that has the best methodologies for analyzing production data. Now, it's crazy because like I stand here now and I see how this stuff has all evolved. At that time, there was nothing like that, right? There was Aries and there was like Rax OFM software that, you know, basically you could analyze production data, but it was very, very primitive. And so there was these papers that were, you know, talking about these methods, and nobody had made the leap between turning this into something that people could actually use. And so that was our job to really go through all this stuff and make it practical. And it was like, as a learning experience, oh my God, like I spent 2 years doing that. There was a time when I think I had read every single paper about production data analysis and pressure transient analysis. Not anymore. I mean, there's thousands of them now. The body of literature has grown incredibly. But at that time, I was in the thick of it. And at the top of that list was Mike Fetkevich's seminal work that tied the ARPS depletion stems to the Van Everdingen and Hurst solution. And you know, that was the paper that started it all. Without that body of work, my career wouldn't have gone the way it did. And I'm definitely thankful for that. So, you know, when I think about my own career, I was truly blessed, and I'm super grateful for like all the mentors and colleagues that I've had. Like, you can't do anything on your own, right? There's always support behind you that helps you out with these accomplishments. And you know, I was blessed to have some of the best in the industry working at Fiquet. That was huge. I've gotten to do some pretty cool things. I've visited 20 plus countries. I guess it's the 20 plus rule. I visited 20 plus countries, delivering, you know, as a distinguished lecturer for the SPE and doing training and things like that. I've got my name on 20 plus SPE technical papers. I think 1 or 2 of them were actually peer-reviewed and published at one point. I should dig those up somewhere. I've got them somewhere. I was lucky enough to be involved in building, as you mentioned, some pretty cool software. The name of that software now is S&P Global Harmony. I was one of the designers of that software. You stole my joke. You know, I was going to say, I hear there's some competition for that now. I'm honestly, I'm thrilled to see what Whitson is doing. It's fantastic to have, you know, I'm not affiliated with the S&P Global stuff anymore, but it's fantastic to have competition. What it does is it just makes things better for everyone, right? If you've got teams that are pushing each other, you're always going to make sure you've got the best products out there. And yeah, the Whitson team has done a bang up job of producing some really cool software. What was I going to say now? Yeah. My greatest talent, as I've been told by my buddies, is my ability to consume vast amounts of alcohol at conferences and stay up late at night, and then the next day go and teach a course or do a lecture series or something like that, and just look like, you know, nothing happened. I can still almost do that. I'm getting a little bit old for that, but I'll take it. On a serious note, you know, these conferences and getting to see friends and colleagues, that to me, that's the most important part of the business. It's the people, it's the relationships that keep me wanting to keep doing this. And when I look back on my career, I think I would hope that, and you mentioned it already, I resonate a lot with Mike Fetkevich. I would never compare myself to him, but I think his motivations were similar to my own. If I do have a gift, I think it's a talent. I think it's, you know, taking abstract concepts, something that I understand really well, and distilling it down, sharing that knowledge, making it practical. That's what really keeps me going, right? Making it so that helping other people apply this stuff, whether it's through software or training or whatever it is. I love teaching. I'm passionate about teaching. And it just so happens I've been able to do that with rate transient analysis. That was my chosen subject. So that's what I love to do is share my knowledge on that, help people use those tools, apply those methodologies, help get value out of that information. And so once again, yeah, super honored. Thank you, everybody at Whitson, for this prestigious award and the recognition that comes along with it. I'll leave you guys with one last thought before I close out and we get to our happy hour, where I will prove my skills to you all. And that is, you know, if we take a 30,000-foot view, this industry and I'll try to leave something inspirational for the young people in the room. This industry and the career that you guys have chosen, it's important. It matters. You know, I think right now it matters probably more than ever in history. We live in a world that would literally fall apart without access to cheap, abundant energy. And as petroleum engineers and geoscientists, you guys, you know, especially the young folks, you're on the front lines of that in a very real way. So I encourage you to take pride in your career. As you mentioned about Fetkevich, always do your best. Bring your A game to the table. Bring passion to the work that you do. Never stop learning. Always, you know, I'm 52 years old. I've been doing this for 25 years. I learn something new. I love coming to these things. I always learn something new. You always want to keep, and this, you know, petroleum technology is changing so fast. You always want to keep on the cutting edge of it. And, you know, just conduct your career with honor and integrity, and everything will fall into place. Thank you.
Thanks much. Really appreciate it.
Beautiful. Awesome. We need to remember the point.
Yeah.
Good. The bar has opened here, so now we have 45 minutes here for mingling, and then the bus shows up there 6 sharp on the outside and buses us to Flight Club. Those who needs a bus.
Get this thing. Yeah. I can see. Oh, that's all. Need help.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
It's my father-in-law, David Dahlgren.
Oh, wow.
Come say hi to you.
Well, there you go. He's like family, more or less. Yeah,
That's what he said.
yeah, that's right. That's right. That's exactly right. So we had